This is what you want. This is what you get. This is what you get.
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all. So say we all.
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
Indiana Jones is back, pursued by Belloc, befriended by Sulla, threatened by Toth, and loved by Marion. Some of them are heroes. Some of them are enemies, and all of them are returning this summer. They are all Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's the greatest adventure film of all time.
Jones! I'm gonna blow up the Ark, Renee!
And it will always be fun. Trust me. Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and today we are hitting Posters of the Month once again. This time around, we are going to look at an international Raiders of the Lost Ark poster, one that might be familiar to a few of you, and it kind of made its way to the American audience in a kind of like a back door kind of way. And then we're going to look at an Empire Strikes Back poster that's also primarily a foreign used poster with a completely different style to it, but nonetheless a fantastic interpretation of The Empire Strikes Back. So let's begin with our Posters of the Month right now.
You can collect them all.
You are a toy!
Batteries not included.
Get those wonderful toys.
Details on specially marked packages at participating stores.
Is that the $6 million man's boss?
It's Oscar Goldman.
Why do you have that?
That's worth a lot of money. That's much more valuable than Steve Austin.
Action figures each sold separately.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end.
Some assembly required.
All your favorite Star Wars heroes and villains.
I have 3 of each. 1 to display, 1 to open, and 1 just in case.
All right, let's get started with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, we've done Raiders before. We've done a number of Raiders of the Lost Ark posters. We did the original, then the re-release, and we mentioned, we didn't go deep into it, but we mentioned that there was a third one that I was aware of floating around out there that I actually had on the album, the storybook album of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, that poster, that art, is from Drew Struzan. Probably don't have to tell you guys by now who Drew Struzan is. He is one of the top, probably 5 poster artists that used to work in this particular field. And this is a poster that was not very well seen in the US because it's used, or was used primarily for the international release of Raiders of the Lost Ark. However, apparently it was also used for the 10th anniversary re-release of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I personally don't remember that. I don't remember if I went to any 10th anniversary re-release of Raiders. I just cannot, my memory is just blank. I guess I would have to go dig through my diaries to see if there's any record. I guess that would have been in 1991. But anyway, the poster that I have, let me describe it to you so we can kind of get on the same page here. And again, if you have that album, that storybook album of Raiders, that's the art we're talking about. What you see on the poster is Indy and Marion standing side by side on the top, staring kind of straight out. Around them is the frame of like an Egyptian temple. Around the middle and the bottom, you have flames. Right dead center in the bottom, you have the Ark. And then you have some photos, which art based on photos. A lot of this is art based on photos. Of, on the right, Indy on a horse. On the left, Belloc. You do see a slight line of what appears to be camels and people riding camels. Then slightly below, you have Dietrich, the Nazi commander, and a big cobra next to him. And Belloc and Toth on the other side, with also a big snake next to him. Again, it's symbolism is there. It's there. It does have the Raiders logo, but it's very tiny because behind the Raiders logo, you see a big 10 where it says 10th anniversary. Now, once again, this is a Drew Struzan picture. And initially doing the research just on the internet alone, I wasn't able to find too much. But then I remember that I have a Drew Struzan art book. And man, do I wish we had a book like this for most of these artists that we talk about. Because the first poster that he talks about in this book, and the book is called The Art of Drew Struzan. And I think it came out like 10 or 12 years ago. And it highlights some of his major works. But anyway, the first one they talk about here, ironically, is Raiders of the Lost Ark. And they do talk about the fact that if you're used to thinking of Raiders, just like I have mentioned in the past, my first image of Raiders, again, when you're dealing with posters or merchandising or anything like that, is the Amsel poster. That famous Amsel poster that I eventually got, because the one that I had purchased originally was his second poster, the one that I kind of consider to be more of a comic bookish poster. Now, if you guys remember, part of the reasoning of the design of the original poster was not to reveal too much. The original poster had Indy, and I think you had a little small picture on the side of him and Marion, and then another tiny little picture on the side of him on a horse. Well, the theory, which, I can't prove it, of course, but again, from learning of all these other films, and especially since you're dealing with Lucas and Spielberg, you kind of think, okay, well, these guys, they have a way of doing things, was that, I guess, on the initial poster, you don't want to reveal too much. This is something that happens a lot with posters, and especially, once we talk about Star Wars, for example, talk about not revealing too much. You have some surprises that you don't want to disclose on the poster. And also in the bottom of the poster, the lower, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the lower 6 or 7th section is where you have the credits. Now, I have a reproduction, as I usually do with some of these older posters. And I remember when I first got it, I was not very impressed with the quality. And I might still be right that this is partially a poorly printed poster. However, I'm looking around on websites and I'm trying to compare. And I don't know, maybe it's just a badly produced poster. I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure exactly what it is. But the point here is this. The art that I have for this poster is the art for the international poster that was later reused for the 10th anniversary by a company called Killian, which is a familiar sounding name because I think, if I remember right, Killian also produced, I think, that other cool Star Wars posters that has all the posters in the poster. If you guys remember, where it's like a collector's poster of what posters to collect. So that is who is credited for putting out this particular 10th anniversary poster. But the bottom line is that you're basically recycling old art. One of the things about finding out, the history of that particular poster, and it's very super handy in this particular case, is the fact that in this book, like I said, Struzan talks about the fact that he was commissioned to do 3 comps, and he did 3 color comps, and out of those 3 comps, this poster emerged, not as a direct copy of one of those comps, but he then, based on the feedback he got, he was able to mash up together the final poster, which is what we have now. In the book, he talks about how at that time he had a partner that dealt with the business side and he dealt with the creative side. And that is something that had been documented before. I forget where I read it. I might have read it or listened to it in his documentary, that he had a huge falling out with his partner, and this partner ended up stealing a lot of his paintings, a lot of his money and whatever. But one of the things he said was that even though he was working at the time for Star Wars or for some Star Wars properties or for even Raiders, he never really had a chance to interact directly with Lucas or Spielberg, during that period of time. All he had was the instructions of, okay, we want a poster. Here's a brief description of what the movie's about, and here's a couple of stills from the production. And that is something that is very interesting because the images he draws, I do remember seeing them as photographs. So you can kind of tell he's using a photograph as a reference to what he's drawing, to what he's painting. As a matter of fact, even some of the pictures look familiar. Indy riding on the horse on the middle right side looks a lot like the Indy riding on the horse, on some of these other posters. It almost looks as if a lot of the artists that were supplied a lot of the same photographic material, for references. But what is very, very clear here is that when you look at the different comps that he made, there are certain elements that were basically lifted from the comp and brought over to the final poster. So, for example, the picture of Belloc, that kind of moved from comp to final poster. The picture of Toth, same thing. It moves from one to the other to the final poster, obviously positioned in a different location. And let's see, Dietrich, he's also brought over to the final poster. Now, with Indy and Marion, one note that he was given was that they wanted them to be equally sized, as projected to be co-stars, equally, size-wise on the poster, because the different comps that he had her kind of off to the side a little bit, not as large as Indy, in terms of the star, the co-star, that kind of thing. So by the time we get to that third poster, the first, second, and third comp, she's kind of like your traditional damsel in distress, let's say. Again, you got to think about the feel of this movie, and it's the 40s. It's you're trying to get that feel, or at least on the poster anyway. She's kind of off to the side. She's hanging on to Indy, that kind of thing. Indy's standing in one, and she's kind of crouched next to his leg on the other. Very classic romantic kind of posing. By the time we get to the final poster, she's standing next to him, kind of like holding her own. She's slightly behind them, but size-wise, they're pretty much the same at this point. The final version of Indy that we see is also from one of the comps. So it's really neat how you can see the progression of we try this, ooh, keep that, get rid of this, keep that, get rid of that. The other note that he was given when putting together the final poster is to remove any Nazi emblems, swastikas, all that kind of stuff. Remove it. I mean, you can keep the character, but remove the symbols. And that's something that I never really noticed before, or it never really came up that clear. So again, if I'm looking at these comps, I can see that some of them, not all of them, but some of them do have Nazi symbols, because they're the bad guys of the film. Especially the last comp has a big multiple Nazi symbol section. But by the time we get to the final one, yes, he did remove them all, as did all other posters that were put out for Indiana Jones, or Raiders of the Lost Ark for that matter. You look at the Amstel ones, you're like, oh my God, that's right, there are no Nazi symbols. Even the UK version of the poster, because yes, there are multiple versions by even another artist called Brian Bysouth, or Bsouth, something like that, which, I don't know, maybe one day we'll talk about. That, yeah, I'm like, a completely different style, completely different looking poster. And yes, everybody is avoiding the Nazi symbols, which is very, very interesting. That is one of the mandates, of the creators of the film. Another thing that Struzan talks about in the book having to do with this poster, and just in general, I guess, is that, well, in this particular poster, if you look at the top left, around Indy's hat, to the left of that, there's this inscription. And to the right, there's also another inscription. So you have the Egyptian like wings and then two inscriptions. And he was asked eventually at some point, many years later, I think by Lucas, as to what that means. And he said that's the word God in Hebrew, almost as if to imply that the Ark was manufactured by God, in terms of, again, the mythology of what we're dealing with here. So he kind of wrote it on there. The other thing that he mentioned is that because he was using an Egyptian theme, in other words, to do the border work, using those columns and that top piece there. On the column on the right, he says there's something called a cartouche, and I've heard that name before, and it's kind of like a little square with a line going through it. And if you kind of follow the line, it almost looks like an S. You could kind of see an S being formed. And he says that is something he used to do back then when he used to work with his partner in order to be able to hide his signature, more or less, or his initial S. Because back then, he says that it was encouraged, at least by his partner, not to put his name on the poster. Again, I am familiar with that whole thing about not putting your name on the poster, people not letting you do that as an artist, discouraging you from doing that. And that is more of a power move in terms of this is a way to be able to hide, who the actual person who did it is and be able to take credit, by someone else, whether it's an agency or a partner that's trying to rip you off in this particular case. But he says that is something that you'll find sometimes. He says way, 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 way later, when he started to reclaim some of these paintings, because he says he lost a ton of paintings to this partner that he had, and he had to then repurchase them back from collectors to kind of get his paintings back. He says that in the process of refurbishing this particular painting, this particular one, he had to repaint it because it was so damaged by the sun, the fading. And one of the things that he did was he actually added his signature to it on the top right, which is something that back then, he wasn't doing. Now, ironically enough, at a certain point, Lucas ended up rebuying this painting from Struzan again from him to have in his archives. And like I said, we do see this painting being reused every now and then in certain areas. Now, the further irony of this whole issue having to do with signatures is that as he got more famous, as he got more popular as an artist, and people started to identify his paintings with, a certain movie poster done by Struzan, the whole collector market, that started to pop up. Sometimes he had to add his signature, just like he did on his own for this one that he bought back. But sometimes, if something were to get damaged to something, they would ask him to please, add your signature back and that sort of thing. Because at the time, the market had shifted so much from a downplay the artist to upplay the artist, which is something that we are definitely not in anymore. We are not in that kind of marketplace anymore. The book is fantastic. I strongly recommend you get this book if you like Struzan. And there is, like I said, there is a documentary too that talks a lot about this. But what I also absolutely loved was the introduction. And the introduction is pretty long here, but let me just read the first 2 paragraphs, actually 3 paragraphs, from Frank Darabont, the movie director. He directed the first couple of episodes of The Walking Dead, The Green Mile, the Shawshank Redemption, you name it. Darabont is a big fan of Struzan. But let me just read this to you, just to get an idea of what we're talking about. Memo to the reader from a crabby old man on the subject of movie posters. I have seen the future, and it sucks. There, I said it. Someone had to. Send your complaints to City Hall. There is no sugarcoating this. Movie posters suck these days. They're going to suck even more tomorrow. And as we shuck and jive, and text and Facebook, ever onward into the digital future, movie posters will just keep doggedly and willfully sucking all the more. It's a headlong progression of suckage, a symptom of mass-produced, everything-by-committee mindset of our culture. The sad thing about movie posters sucking is that many people no longer even notice or don't care. It is such a great essay that he writes, and I encourage you to read the rest of it, because he talks about the thing that I've been talking about forever now, and that is, I grew up on a certain aesthetic, and that aesthetic has left us already. If you grew up in the 40s and 50s, there's a certain style of posters that you would see in a movie theater that to me are not as appealing. And that's because everybody likes what they like, and they like a lot of things that are of their time. Maybe it's when you're young that it kind of ingrains in you and it stays with you for the rest of your life. But if I look at the history of poster making, yes, you have those earlier ones, you have those earlier, but something happens in the 70s for me, and something definitely happens in the 80s. And once we get to the 90s, it starts to say goodbye. You could see them waving goodbye at you. And this essay that Darabont wrote, as the introduction, as the foreword to the Struzan book is dead on. As I said before, I got this poster as a reprint. I got it, I think, at Walmart.com. And yeah, the quality, it's very unusual because, I'm used to seeing the word Raiders huge in the middle. But I have to remember, this poster was originally meant for international. So they purposely left a lot of stuff there in the middle so that you could insert whatever, foreign language name you put in there. And I honestly do not remember seeing this re-release. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I personally dislike the way that they squeezed Raiders and 10th anniversary. It should have been bigger. It should have been bolder, richer. But this is how they decided to do it. I do, however, remember seeing Raiders on some kind of re-release. It might have been at the Alamo back in New York when they were promoting the Blu-ray release, maybe? I don't know what anniversary we're talking about here. 40th? Oh my God, 40th? Could it have been the 30th anniversary or something like that? It was around the time the Blu-ray came out. I remember re-seeing it in the theater, but I don't know, maybe I did see it. I just can't remember. It was so long ago. And that has another poster that we will be talking about in the future because it was so well done. But again, this is another one of these, oh my God, it's not the first one that comes to mind, but it is a really cool looking poster. It's dark as compared to the other ones. This one's much darker. And it's like, why would they pick the other ones? Well, the other ones are good too. The other ones are damn good. And I will still hold on to the fact that the original one, the Amsel one sheet, is the one that I prefer. I always love that poster. It's bare bones. It doesn't give you too much. But it's weird also that for the international audience, it's like they're giving you a little more of a taste of what's going on. So is it possible that for the international audience, you're willing to give them a little more spoilery information to kind of entice them a little more into getting in there and watching this film? That's a possibility. I don't know, maybe. Who knows how these things are thought of. Another interesting thing is that the second Amsel poster that we talked about a while back, you have the bordering around it is all, I think, of the South American jungle temple, the opening sequence motif. And this time around, it is Egypt motif. So it's good that Struzan didn't kind of repeat himself from what Amsel was doing. He kind of went in a different direction. And I also wonder did Struzan have access to Amsel's work? This way he would know what not to do. Do they give the artist those instructions that, listen, we're giving this to a few artists and this guy is already kind of heading in that direction. You might want to do something different, so you don't kind of repeat yourselves. Again, if we ever do the Brian Bysouth one, that is going to be the most unusual of all of them as far as I'm concerned. But we'll deal with that in the future. In the meantime, you can get this poster at Amazon. You can get this poster, I got it at Walmart. I'm sure they probably get it at Amazon and so many other places, a reproduction. I think it's under $20, but it's great. It's a great poster. And luckily, like I said, I at least have the original album cover for the storybook of the movie with this print on it. Our next poster is The Empire Strikes Back. And this is definitely one that I have not done before. It's one that I've kind of become familiar with later in life, let's say. Obviously, the big one is the Castell Gone with the Wind Empire Strikes Back poster, which I'm not entirely sure if I really dove into that one yet head on. I think I've skirted around that poster a number of times. Because the ones that I owned originally, I have a reproduction Castell, but the ones that I owned originally were junk posters for Empire. the young versions of the posters. And even recently, I think I talked about one of the international, mainly European versions. So you have the Gone with the Wind, then you have the European ones, which are the Youngs, which is the Vader with the sword down, and the picture of Han and picture of Leia, and you know that kind of either in a pink, purple, or blue motif. But then there's this third tier poster, if you will. And it depends on what market you go, which is more associated with Asia, South America, Australia, you know, the international market. And this is a poster done by a former artist named Noriyoshi Ohrai. And the story goes that, again, when Lucas was brainstorming, you know, for ways to come up with a poster for Empire, and he's peppering the entire industry, you know, trying to get different artists to, you know, put up some concept work for him. He wanted to see what this Japanese artist could do, because he somehow got a hold of some of his magazines, covers that he did, some of the artwork that he did in Japan. He was already a pretty established artist. He did a little bit of work before and a lot of work after. You know, the fact that he got connected to Lucas at one point, you know, made him a pretty hot commodity for Japanese art. He also ended up doing a lot more art for Star Wars, for comic books, for all kinds of additional, you know, material, media, print material. But, you know, the guy did a ton of Godzilla stuff and, you know, you name it. But for Star Wars, primarily his big poster is this one. And like I said, this is a poster I wasn't very familiar with. I kind of seen a little, you know, thumbnails of this poster when it came to investigating, you know, the international poster world. I did a show a long time ago about, you know, the international posters, all the different variations that were out there. And this was just another one that kind of flew by, and it kind of stuck because, you know, there was, to me, there's a point where some of these posters start to veer into the airbrush Photoshop. I know this is pre-Photoshop, but basically taking photos, cutting them out, and making a collage. You know, I would use the word collage a lot, and you know, when I was describing these posters. And those are the ones that I'm not crazy about. Japan had a few of them. I think France had a few of them. There's a couple of countries that, yeah, they kind of veer into that direction. You know, I'm always biased towards the art. You know, I'm an art person. Brush, pencil, you know, that kind of thing. But this is one that kind of struck because while on one hand, it has a lot of characters in the poster, way more than I expected. The positioning and the size of the characters I find very interesting. I know I use that word way too much. Given the history of how these things are designed, and again, you got to keep in mind that whatever crazy psychological reason for the way posters are put together in America, those rules might not apply in other countries. You know, while we might be more susceptible to a certain design, a different country will be completely different. And as you can remember, if you think back to that international poster special that I had a while back, when you get to some of those Eastern Bloc countries back in the 80s, the style of the posters are so out there, like so out there that it's like another planet in terms of what movie are they even trying to sell here? Because you know it's just a weird, different style. But anyway, this particular poster, which let me describe it first. And just so you know, the reason that I got even more familiar with this poster, out of all things in the world, is a while back I wanted to buy a couple of Star Wars t-shirts with an international poster design. So I was trying to look for, well, you know, because I'm from Uruguay, I was trying to look for t-shirts that had, you know, Star Wars or any of its sequels in Spanish to see what poster was being used and what logo was being used and what phrasing was being used. And I was able to find a Star Wars one and a Return of the Jedi one. And then for the Empire Strikes Back, I found this one, which is like, oh, wow, this is just like the international, the Japanese one. And it was basically in Spanish. Now, for the South American market, at least, the research I was able to find, unfortunately, doesn't cover too many countries in terms of which countries use what poster, but primarily Brazil and Argentina. And both of them, I believe, have this art too. And that's the t-shirt I was able to find. I mean, it was a cheapy little old t-shirt. I got it at Walmart.com or something. But hey, it's like, wow, they actually have it in Spanish. It's amazing. And I'm pretty sure they have it in Japanese or even some other languages. But at that particular time, I was looking for the Spanish version. But anyway, now, compared to the other two posters that we're more familiar with, this poster I find a lot darker, a lot more menacing. You have, let's say, I would say about half the poster is a silhouette of Vader in a slight greenish tint up top. You kind of see a more or less stars that kind of make up his helmet. You see these shooting up lines that could be the trail of spaceships. You do see a couple of X-Wings with trails behind them, so you can kind of make that connection and say, oh, those are supposed to be just spaceships everywhere. There's a big light cross at the top right of the poster, which is not necessarily connected to anything specific. It's the type of cross that you would have seen with Luke in the original John Star Wars poster. You know, when you, in the poster, the lightsaber pointing up, forming that cross symbol. But it's here, but again, not necessarily connected to anything specific. The top of the poster says, "The Star Wars saga continues." This is the poster I have. Obviously, it'll say something else depending on the language or the particular country. There are some variations. There's a lot of variations to this poster. So now when you get to the middle of the poster, you start to see some actual characters. So for example, you have Lando, very prominent, and I would say almost second largest figure there in the entire thing. Behind Lando, there's Cloud City. You could see just the edges of it because in front of Cloud City and in front of Lando, you see the Falcon kind of flying. Let's see, if you're looking forward, it's flying right to the right and to the top, to the 1 o'clock position on a clock, let's say. So it's kind of dissecting the poster in half, but in a diagonal manner. It's a very different kind of geometry to a poster. Obviously, everything is still more or less kind of in a triangular manner. Everything builds from the middle downward and from the middle upward, with the big giant Vader head. Then in front of the Falcon, again, this is like a layering. It's like a collage of not pictures, but drawings. Then you have Han and Leia right in front. Leia on the left, Han on the right, and they're about to kiss. This is a shot that is way even closer than the Castell one. The Castell is the traditional Gone with the Wind dip, but this is them right about to kiss pretty much from the movie. Like, it looks like a frame of the movie. They're much closer than the Castell poster. And now their heads are a little bigger than Lando. So again, if you're kind of thinking about the importance of the characters, if you go down that route, because that's a very important thing here in America, and especially for actors, the arrangements they made with their agents and the managers, and my face must be bigger in the poster than that person's face, and my name must be big, all that kind of crap. I don't know if this is playing a role in it. You go down another notch, and now you have Chewbacca, you have C-3PO, you have R2-D2, and you have Luke below. Luke, size-wise, is much smaller than Lando even. He's a little bigger than Chewbacca in terms of the ratio of the size, and a little bigger than C-3PO and R2-D2. But if you look at this poster, you would think that Luke is not as important as not only Lando, but way less important than Leia and Han. Again, I don't know if that is playing a factor here. Then if you go a little bit lower to the right, you see a couple of AT-ATs kind of coming forward. Now, once again, I'm going to say a lot of these drawings to me look like they came right out of photography. They look just like certain photographs that are out there that I'm very familiar with that were kind of used to make this sort of collage. It almost looks like a collage style design done with art. Through the legs of the AT-ATs, you can actually see a giant Tauntaun head, which looks a lot like the Tauntaun from the Castell. That traditional photo of Luke on top of the Tauntaun, but here you don't see Luke, you just see the Tauntaun head facing the right. You also see a Probot back there. There's a Probot back there. Okay, it's a Probot. Then You also kind of see a little bit of Dagobah in the background. You see what could be an X-Wing engine maybe back there or something. Now, if we move to the left, there's definitely a X-Wing full of debris and plants, which is the X-Wing that comes out of the swamp. You see the back of that. On top of the X-Wing, you start to see a whole row of bounty hunters. You see Boba Fett, you see IG-88, and then in the middle, you see 21B, like they threw in a robot-looking things all together. Completely different coloring style than the other ones, the more realistic ones. These are more like silhouetted in red. You see some explosions below them. You see a Hoth Rebel turret gun. You see a whole bunch of Rebel soldiers aiming and shooting in the opposite direction, from the trenches, from the Hoth trenches. There's a lot of stuff happening on this poster. And unfortunately, I don't have the information of how exactly this poster was put together. In one of these books that I own called Star Wars Posters, this is the book that has the Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Jedi preview poster in the art on the cover. There is a section where we do get to see all these. And oh yeah, I could see right there that you also can see a whole bunch of... Can you see them? You can't. Wow, there's a difference. That's amazing. Apparently, the original one, you can also see some stormtroopers, but I don't see the stormtroopers in mine. That is just simply incredible. Actually, wow, what a difference. There are some subtle differences. That's incredible. Because I'm comparing the Japanese version with the one that I have, and there are some very minor differences, which to me would seem so insignificant, but they're there. They're right there. Incredible. So what I was saying before is that I haven't been able to find too much or just about any information having to do with the design of the poster. I do have a picture in this book, in this Star Wars poster book, that has a full color painted concept treatment for this poster done a year before. And what's similar about it is that it does seem to follow this character after character in a linear fashion for the poster. So here it's more of a triangle. Everything is a pyramid, let's say. But in the initial concept for the poster, the colors are completely different, first of all. The concept was very orange and yellow centric. But the characters were almost kind of like swooping from the left up to the right top, kind of piled on top of each other. And in the mix of characters, it looks like Luke was on top, and then Leia, and then Han, and possibly that could be Lando. They're very hard to tell because these are very conceptual drawings. Vader looms in the background, and the Falcon goes from right to left as opposed to left to right in this case. Again, cutting in an angle. So there was a little bit of that design there already until it became more, I don't know if you can call it geographical or whatever you want to call it in this final version of it. I've seen versions of this poster for other countries where they completely reverse the poster so that everybody's on the opposite side. The Falcon goes the other way. Instead of Leia and Han, it's Han and Leia. Lando's on the right instead of the left. Don't understand why they would do that. The very faint differences between the Japanese version and my version and even the version here in the book, which I don't know if it's... let's see, this is called I see what we call it here. It's called a pre-final painted artwork. So even the book doesn't have the final version, which is what we're looking at. It looks to me like the final version, the biggest difference, that's amazing. The final version looks like they remove a couple of stormtroopers from the painting. It looks like they changed Leia's arm from red to white, because I guess white is what she's wearing in the Falcon when they kiss, as opposed to red, which is what she's wearing. Oh my God. And Bespin. Yeah, it's just so subtle, the differences. They're just so slightly subtle. And yeah, it also looks like Vader is a little lower, his helmet, and it's a little bigger, I think, too, in the final composited poster. They made him bigger and brought him down some more, to take up a little more real estate, which is traditional in a Star Wars poster, that you always have Vader kind of hovering over everything. Once again, this is a very different kind of poster. There might be something to the fact that when it comes to international posters, they really don't care too much about withholding characters or surprises. Now, I'll tell you what's not on this poster, which doesn't surprise me, but it does surprise me, is Yoda. If they're not shy about showing Boba Fett or Rebels, shooting with with those radar dishes, and Hoth and Lando, which is something that we'll get into when we deal with the original Castell poster, where they purposely removed Lando and Boba Fett and some of these other things because it was more of a reveal thing. They didn't want to give it away. Now, I know that with the Castell poster, there was a little bit of controversy where Billy D. Williams complained about the fact that he wasn't being advertised, for some reason, hint, hint. And that eventually when they revamped the poster, I think they put him back in or something like that. I don't remember exactly how that went, but we'll explore that in the future. And also, given the fact that in the past, now this is Japan as opposed to China, I know those two countries are not the same, but I know with the Chinese audience, there was also this controversy of them downplaying, if not all, removing a black character, Finn, from the Force Awakens. When that poster was being circulated, the Chinese version of it had him kind of tiny on the corner. And it's like, wait a minute, this guy's one of the stars of the film. And they kind of relegate him to really tiny. Here's where this is kind of bizarre. It's like, in this particular case, they're showing you a lot of characters. Not Yoda, I get it. But they're not being shy about spoiling some of the highlights, locations, and the showpieces of the film. The AT-ATs are there, the probe droid is there, the rebels are fighting, and the weird-looking bounty hunters, robots. Lando, a brand new character that is going to be playing a very important role in this film and future films. And it's kind of like, okay, I guess that's the way it is because it's an international poster. They're not too worried about spoilers because, again, the international poster, by the time the movie gets to some of these countries, the cat's out of the bag at that point. Again, we're not dealing with social media. This is 1982, 83 we're talking about when this poster is being put together. I mean, for Christ's sake, the information I have here is that he was working on this poster as early as 1979. So, who knows? And these posters, again, they sometimes get tweaked along the way. There's one version of this poster, the one that I'm using, that I'm looking at here, which is very similar to the one that I have on my wall here that I'm looking at. Also, is credited as being the 1982 re-released, dubbed in Japanese version of Empire Strikes Back. So, yeah, there's a lot of variations that these posters go through. And this poster seems to have gone through a lot of tweaks internally, externally, where to put the credits, where did the credits go. The one that I have in my wall, which is a reproduction, got it from Amazon, I believe. It was about $13, $14. It's a full-size poster. It's gorgeous. It's a fantastic reproduction as far as I'm concerned. It has the credits in the bottom, like they usually would, the space where the credits would go. And it has all the credits on the left side, and then the title of the movie on the right side. They didn't throw the title right in the middle because they would then cover up something. Or in some of these international posters, like they have the title right dead in the middle, and then the credits kind of off to the side, separated into two sections. Now, the poster that I have, again, keep in mind, is not a poster that would have been made in the US for a theatrical distribution. This is just a version of the style of the poster, put together so somebody could see it. As a matter of fact, the trademark copyright says 1996 on the poster from a company called Zigzag Posters in Germany. So the important thing about the poster, as far as I'm concerned, is the style of the art. That's the main thing. The positioning of the credits doesn't really matter much because in all reality, this was not made for this purpose. The closest thing I've seen to something like this is South Africa, believe it or not, where they do have that, title on one side, credits on the other side, left and right, side by side design. Again, a different take on the poster, a much darker poster. The colors are much darker. There's a dark blues and there's dark greens, and very good motif for what we get with Empire Strikes Back. And definitely another different take on Empire when you compare it to Castell and to Jung without, betraying the art of painting brushes and pencils. But in a way, kind of tippy-toeing into the Photoshop-y kind of world that we were heading into already at that point. At least this poster doesn't have photos, but I mean, you can tell everything was based on a photo. Except for Lando. I don't remember seeing a photo of Lando from that angle. It's such an unusual angle. And again, it's just so odd. By looking at this poster, you figure that Lando might be the star of the film, or Han and Leia are the stars, and Lando is just a huge thing that now you have. And then there's this guy called Luke down there somewhere. It's so weird, what this poster tells you. I guess you would have a different reaction, like myself, when you already have the history of the film and everything that comes with the film and the posters that already existed, and then you're thrown this picture, this painting, and you're like, oh, that's different. It's unusual. It's different, but it's still good. Again, I love the art. The art is what sells it. Even that picture of Lando, like I said, even that pose of Lando that I'm not very familiar with, it pops. It definitely pops as something that you've seen before. The Gone with the Wind-ish, the almost kiss, obviously that's a very reminiscent of the Castell one. But you're like, okay, it's kind of like the Castell, but just a little flipped on its side. No pun intended, since the Falcon, is on a diagonal flying. But yeah, just another one of these great international posters. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. We looked at 2 posters for our Posters of the Month segment. First up, we did a Raiders poster, which is another one of these fantastic Struzan creations that, most of you might not be very familiar with, because we're more into the Amsel ones, those 2 primary ones, the first one and then the re-release poster. But this one is one that eventually found its way to the American audience in a different manner, and not only on the story of Raiders of the Lost Ark album, but on some of the re-releases that, from what I understand, the 10th anniversary re-release. Another great interpretation of the film, as far as a classic Raiders of the Lost Ark poster. Then we looked at The Empire Strikes Back, the international version of The Empire Strikes Back that was used in certain territories. One that I wasn't very familiar with until a couple of years ago when I bought a t-shirt. Out of all things, it was Empire Strikes Back in Spanish from a Walmart website. And it was like, oh, I think I remember that picture. I think I've seen it somewhere. And yes, it is the international version. This is the one we talked about, having Lando all the way on the top, really large. And, we theorized on why they might have done it this way, but it still left us a little bit confused. And again, these are just theories, but another theory that I was thinking about, which is something we kind of hinted at, and that is that when we eventually do the classic Gone with the Wind, Empire Strikes Back poster, we are going to talk about the controversy of putting Lando or removing Lando or adding Lando to the poster. I have a feeling, again, this is just another theory, that this poster was kind of made specially to make up to Billy D. Williams for not including him in the original poster. This was kind of like, all right, here's what we're going to do. On the international poster, we're going to make you the top star. You're going to get practically the biggest picture, above everyone else, more or less. So that could have been part of the reasoning why, you would have him there so large compared to Luke Skywalker. Like I said before, he's bigger than Luke Skywalker. He's almost as big as Han and Leia. And he's basically on the top, of the pyramid of characters. So maybe that's what it was all about. It was about a sort of apology maybe for not putting him in the original poster. So they made him the top dog on this poster. But again, that's just my theory. Anyway, thank you guys for listening, and we will see you here soon on GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
まあ見てろ。
何が見てるですよ。
また故障だ。
今はお前にとって危険な時だ。コースの暗黒面からの誘惑にかかりかねない。
決して恐れません。さてどうか。そうではない。 やるかやらぬかだ。試しなどいらん。
愛してるわ。
知ってたさ。
フォースを備えたようだな、スカイウォーカー。だがまだジェダイではない。
アルトどこへ行くんだよ。そんなのは中ばっかに任せて早く私の足をつけてくれよ。おい。
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perron, copyright 2022.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.